whatever may be your need. We are always with you in every situation. Enjoy banking services at your convenience with Mahabank's user-friendly digital platforms like internet banking, mobile banking, Bhim UPI, IMPS and many more. Your convenience is our priority. Your financial partner in digital era. Mahabank Digital Banking.
Bank of Maharashtra.
ये साइड तो थोड़े छोटे कर ले जल्दी।
ये वाला
क्या है?
सर ये साइड से
नहीं नोट कैसी
Number of deaths recorded worldwide is 5,104,000, out of which 1.56 lakhs deaths have been recorded in India itself. On January 30, 2020, India confirmed its first coronavirus case in Kerala, and 1 year down the line, we are still fighting the battle during which we have witnessed several challenges, and most of them have been adapted to various changes and have moved ahead in new directions, introducing new innovations. This is the theme of our conference today. Our college, when was granted autonomy for this academic year 2021, the people at the helm of affairs decided to organize a conference at international level, and the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences took the lead and had a brainstorming session with reference to the theme, and they came to the conclusion to hold the conference on the effects of this pandemic. India witnessed the longest lockdown in the history of this country, commencing from 24th of March 2020, limiting the movement of the entire 1.3 billion population of India as a preventive measure against the COVID-19 pandemic in India. It was ordered after a 14-hour voluntary public curfew, which was popularly known as Janta Curfew, on 22nd of March, followed by the enforcement of a series of regulations in the country's COVID-19 affected regions. The lockdown continued till almost mid of June 2020. Thus, India experienced the longest lockdown in the history of this country. COVID-19 caused a series of impact on almost every society of the earth. Due to the problems caused by this particular health crisis all over the world, the WHO declared it as a global pandemic. Not only that, but because of its rampant spread, countries were forced to stop international traveling as well as locked up themselves. Also, the lockdown has been recognized as the only method to control the spread of pandemic, and almost every country has adopted this method. Amidst the lockdown in Indian society, multiple issues related to social, educational, economic, political, psychological levels, and many more have been noticed, which has created the devastating impact on the lives of the people. Impact of COVID-19 has been multiple and not only limited to society at large. From the perspective of economy, both rural and urban have been impacted adversely. Everyone has seen the issues being faced by migrant workers. The migrant workers depended on daily work earnings. They barely have savings which they could spend during any emergency. Many of them have already even abandoned this world. Those who didn't had enough resources, they moved to their villages because of the unavailability of jobs and monies in the cities, walking thousands of miles barefoot with their family. Apart from migrant workers, other unskilled workers like delivery boys, courier boys, cab drivers, restaurant waiters have been gone through a similar issue. Because of COVID-19, the world came to a stagnant position and the economy took a big hit. Moving from the economy, the impact of COVID-19 on education also has been very cruel, and its repercussions will be seen in upcoming future. With any pandemic, of course, or any situation which impact the society at large, comes the problem of psychological trauma. It has been truly said that the crisis gives pain for many years. Same has happened. Thank you, Dr. Gauri, for the very sacred and beautiful Saraswati Vandana. For the benefit of our overseas participants, the Saraswati Vandana mantra is one of the many mantras chanted to gain favor with Hindu goddess. Saraswati, known as the mother of the Vedas and the champion of knowledge, wisdom and arts. Vandana is a Sanskrit word meaning wisdom. Chanting the Saraswati Vandana mantra is believed to remove all the obstacles to success in one's education and career. Now we go to the much awaited talk. I would request Shri Ramesh Vaze sir, founder trustee of the Kelkar Education Trust, to give the welcome address. Sir.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome one and all to the inaugural transdisciplinary web conference on the pandemic turn. I would like to thank everyone who have taken the time to attend this conference over the next couple of days. The conference aims to bring to the fore the numerous challenges faced by us over the past 1 year and how we overcame it. The idea is to examine the social, cultural, as well as psychological impact the pandemic has had on our lives. The past 1 year has indeed been roller coaster ride. When the pandemic first hit us, we all were in a state of ignorance, but gradually as the reports started piling from across the world, we soon realized the seriousness of the issue. Before we knew, we found ourselves amidst the worst pandemic in over 100 years. Everybody here has someone in their family or someone they know who has been exposed to the virus. Many have been lucky enough to tell their story, but then there are those who paid a much heavier price and left behind a gaping hole in the lives of their loved ones. My heart goes out to each and every one of them. May God give them the strength to emerge out of this terrible situation. This pandemic has been such a great leveler in the fact that it has affected each and every one of us, irrespective of age, gender, class, or status. All of us find ourselves equally vulnerable to the situation. It had come to a point where even mundane activities had come to an absolute standstill, whether it was parents not being able to go to work, or grandparents not able to get any fresh air, or children not being able to go to school. All of us felt stifled on some level or the other. But as the saying goes, when the going gets tough, the tough gets going. I believe we did a super job of pulling up our socks and adapting to the new normal. After harrowing months of April and May, which brought the entire nation to stand still, gradually things started to move. a new normal way of living was being set up. Once offices began to reopen with employees working from home, even those limited computer proficiency began attending Zoom meetings as though it was nothing new. And soon the myth that you have to present in office physically to get a work done was busted. Schools were being conducted online with very promising results as well. Technology took the center stage as many new innovative computer mobile applications were being used to deliver food, deliver groceries in an attempt
to each other. A world we are kind, no matter what class, race, gender, religion, lack of or what job we have. Let love and kindness
Good morning. Respected dignitaries on the dais and off the dais, I must congratulate those teachers who are behind this international seminar, and I hope that this will be a beginning of a series of similar seminars extended to all the disciplines in the college. This pandemic is a challenge and an opportunity. I'll confine myself to the field of higher education. And it's a challenge and an opportunity for teachers as well as the students, because the new technology is coming to play a significant role. And it is now said that technology is no longer is an enabler, but it is actually a transformer. It has become a vehicle. It has become a driver of change. And if you want to really overcome the problems that has been thrown up by the pandemic, it is very important for the teachers to invest on themselves to meet these challenges. And this online teaching learning therefore needs to be understood properly to make it effective. And you know, for the administration, for the management, it gives not only the classroom for planning, and more than the classroom, now the internet space has become an additional opportunity for the students to be met with. That is, to arrange lectures and practicals, even simulations. Without coming to the college classrooms, they can conduct that. For that purpose, the teachers have to equip themselves. And it is very important for the college. I request the management, the principal, to organize at least few sessions for all the teachers to understand the opportunities and also the tools that are available to them to address different situations. For example, we have in the online teaching learning process, there are synchronous tools and asynchronous tools. Synchronous are on face-to-face. You can address the students directly through live chat, audio and video conferencing, data and application sharing, shared whiteboards, joint viewing of multimedia presentations and online slideshows. And it is also very important for the students to be told how to raise their virtual hand in case they have
a question to ask or doubt to be cleared, and they have to be trained in that, how appropriately, so that the entire discussion becomes participative. In case of asynchronous tools, and I don't know how many of our teachers are really familiar with and actually use, because we have been having this online lectures for the last 1 year, and I do not know how many of the teachers understand and use the asynchronous tools, such as email has become a learning. You can communicate to the students through email, threaded discussions, news groups and bulletin boards, file attachment, discussion boards, social media groups, blogs, collaborative documents in the cloud. Cloud has now become a very important source of discussion. Digital library. In fact, library can be digitized so that the students can visit the library sitting at home, or teachers can visit the library, say, from anywhere, even when they are traveling. If they are traveling or if they are out of station, from any part of the world they can visit the library. So there are number of tools that are available and must be used so that the entire e-learning becomes a great opportunity. In fact, you can, instead of admitting 7,000 students, you can admit 70,000 students and accordingly arrange it. Okay? And simulation has been a very important tool for the practical experiential learning. For experiential learning, lot of activities can be used through simulation exercises. And therefore, I request the principal of the college to at least arrange few lectures, few orientation programs, retraining program, re-engineering program, so that the teachers become well equipped, and the students also to be told that these are the tools, and these are the tools that will be used by the teacher, and the students should be able to use those, access those, and so that the entire exercise, e-learning exercise, can make us overcome the pandemic situations. Only thing is that you may have to invest on technology, both on the part of the institution and few equipments on the part of the students. Okay? That is how it can be done, and I hope that this seminar will enable the institution and the students and the teachers to understand the scope of the new technology in higher education. Thank you very much and wish you all the best.
Thank you, Dr. Kurup sir. Listening to you is always a pleasure, and you truly depict a picture that age is just a number. Your talk always have some new things to be shared and new things to be listened. I am sure, of course, with the future of pandemic, after the post-pandemic, maybe we will have 4 classrooms in the college and 4 classrooms online. And Dr. Sharma sir will have a round on online classrooms also. Okay. So I now request Dr. Sharma sir to give his talk, Principal of Vaze College.
Shri 𝘍𝙗𝙗𝙀, Founder Trustee, Mrs. Jyoti Badkamkar, Trustee of the College, Dr. M.R. Kurup, Secretary of the Trust, Shri Dhananjay Sathe, Trustee, Vice Principal Dr. Preeta Nilesh, C.A. Vidyadhar Joshi, Dr. S.S. Barve, Director, SRC, Deans, invited guests and delegates, on behalf of 𝙏𝙗𝙗 College of Art, Science and Commerce, Autonomous, I welcome you all to the inaugural function of International Conference, The Pandemic Turn, Challenges, Directions and Innovations in the New Order. The Vaze College was started in 1984. The college is 4 times NAC accredited A-grade college. Kelkar Vaze College was listed in top 20 colleges in India by India Today in 1998. The college has been awarded the status of college with potential for excellence by University Grants Commission. The college was awarded Best College Award by University of Mumbai when the award was first instituted. The college has a star scheme from Department of Biotechnology, Central Government for undergraduate research. The college has 20 departments, 8 up to postgraduate level, and we have 9 PhD centers. The college has unusual courses like BVoc in tourism and hospitality, postgraduate diploma in perfumery and cosmetology. We have a scientific research center which provides technology to industry and tissue cultured aromatic oil plants to farmers. We have cosmetic testing center and a formulation center. The college has GD Kelkar Skill Development Center and Finishing School with Commerce Lab, Language Lab, and E-Learning Lab. The college is active in institutional social responsibility activities. Our cosmetology center runs a training batch of visually challenged. We train students and teachers from rural colleges using our CSR provided by our management. The college conducts many guest lectures, conducts seminars, workshops, exhibitions, and conferences for the benefit of the students. The conference of 100 years of World War covered papers from history, psychology, sociology, political science, chemistry of war, biology of war, etc. Most of the conferences have been interdisciplinary. I'm sure today's conference will be a great success and benefit all delegates attending it. Once again, I welcome all and congratulate the organizing committee of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma sir. We are all proud to be associated with this college. Now we have an online talk by Dr. Nilakshi Roy, Head of the Department of English. She will be narrating the journey of autonomy. Welcome, Dr. Nilakshi Roy.
Good morning. Good morning and a very warm welcome to this inaugural program. Let me share with you the story of our journey to autonomy. The dream for an autonomous Vaze College was dreamt by the founding principal, Dr. Kurup, and his team under the encouragement of 𝙁𝙗𝙗 Kelkar back in the 1990s. Even after much water passed under the bridge and policies changed, leadership changed, that dream was kept alive by the present leadership under Principal Dr. Sharma. KET's Vaze College, Mulund, Mumbai, has been granted an autonomous status on 5th August 2019, and the parent university, University of Mumbai, approved it on 26th September of the same year. Finally, on 6th February 2020, Vaze College Autonomous stood tall, braving the yet to be unleashed post-pandemic forces. However, since the academic year of 2019-20 had already begun, we implemented autonomy from the next academic year, that is from 2020 to 2021, that is last year, from the 20th of July. It is probably not out of place to bring to the forefront of this august gathering that Vaze College Autonomous conducted all its administrative functions and all academic programs fully and completely online in its first academic year. Whether it was recruitment, syllabi framing, academic council meetings, admissions, lectures, exams, including PhD vivas, and yes, multidisciplinary conferences like the present one, and all cultural programs, including indoor sports and a cultural extravaganza called Dimensions. If morning shows the day, then 2020 has been one long, bright, and sunny morning in the Vaze firmament. Plans to start more postgraduate programs, research events, research centers, increased industrial collaborations, setting up incubation labs, and a humanities and social sciences hub for suburban studies can only pave the way for a strong institution committed to its core values. These are the new plans that we have under autonomy. With a new mission and vision statement, new leaders at the helm, and a new perspective post-COVID, post-pandemic, and post this conference, Vaze College Autonomous, ladies and gentlemen, will shine yet brighter. I promise as I take your lead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nilakshi Roy. Now, to the concept note by Dr. Preeta Nilesh, the pandemic turn. I would request Dr. Preeta to take the charge.
Thank you, Anil. Respected keynote speaker, Professor 𝘲𝙗𝙗𝙗, plenary speaker, Professor 𝑘𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙗𝙗, founder trustee, Sri 𝙗𝙗𝙧𝙗𝙗, trustee, Mrs. Jyoti Bhadkamkar, secretary, Kelkar Education Trust, Dr. 𝑚𝑟 𝐾𝙝𝙗, members of the management, governing body and academic council, principals of colleges in Mumbai, deans of art, science and commerce and administrative officials, University of Mumbai, Principal Dr. Sharma, Vice Principal C.A. Vidyadhar Joshi, Director SRC, Dr. 𝘿𝙗𝙗𝙗, Deans of Vaze College, Chairperson IQAC, organizing chairs of conferences, members of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, Vaze College, fellow academicians and researchers, our alumni, Mr. Hitesh Thakkar and Dr. Gauri Kavi, my colleagues and dear students, good morning. COVID-19 has changed the way we live, and it will be a while before the world bounces back. The most difficult part has been the unknown. The year 2020 will be described as a year of reckoning for humankind, societies, democracies, and economies. The WHO, IMF, and epidemiologists debated, and the world suffered from a tyranny of experts. A president lost his presidency due to his ill handling of COVID-19, and 91-year-old Margaret Keenan is known to the world as the recipient of the world's first vaccine shot. More focus on health and science and funding is what experts have always sought, and now they have it. It has been estimated that the world may have spent a total of $6 trillion to deal with the economic consequences of COVID-19, not counting the billions spent in laboratories around the world to fast-track an effective vaccine. The pandemic pummeled the economy and upended people's lives. Some lost their jobs, some took pay cuts, while the self-employed saw incomes drop. Individuals and families today are rethinking their day-to-day expenditures and their long-term financial planning. The pandemic has starkly exposed the perils of the rampant degradation of the planet's fragile ecology. It has changed our relationship with the environment and brought into focus the interdependence between humanity and biodiversity. recycled packaging, edible packaging, reducing the carbon footprint is being talked about as never before. 2020 was the year of the home that became the office and college, the gymnasium and the restaurant, the studio and the auditorium. It was the year of family meals, family bonding, collaboration, and conflict. It was the year when the home became the sanctuary and also a prison. Many of us questioned, is stay home, stay safe? While world over, work from home was an attractive proposal when there was a choice. When it became a reality, was it really so? We know that our work-life balance was surely impacted. COVID-19 forced a transition to enhanced household chores, including child care and elder care. Confinement to the home increased mental and health needs, enhanced financial inequalities, and threatened gender equality. Work from home during the pandemic saw a surge in domestic violence against women. It also saw a rise of suicides, mostly women, due to isolation. Japan has even appointed a minister of isolation to deal with the pandemic-driven surge. How did women cope? Were they helpless? Did they see hope? COVID-19 dealt a blow to the entertainment industry. 2020 was the year of the small screen. The small screen took big steps towards the new normal. It was a year of losses, but not devoid of cinematic joy. The television industry resumed work soon enough, and from following safety measures to people testing COVID positive on set, it was not an easy ride, but the show did go on. With tournaments and sporting events getting cancelled or postponed, the entire concept of stadium experiences changed. In the world of uncertainty, the entertainment and sporting industry had to innovate and refurbish. The pandemic redefined, transformed, and even simplified our relationship with food. This newfound relationship got people across the globe connected with cooking, and quite a few men entered home kitchens. Exploring family recipes and indulging in comfort food with locally available ingredients saw uncomplicated foods being relished. The pandemic saw the rise of the home chef, cloud kitchens, and micro-cuisine. As the lockdown lifted, we have been ordering in food like never before, and restaurant proprietors are striving to deliver exclusive experiences to us while we continue to keep our links with daily comfort food. Some have started questioning the very purpose of a restaurant in the 21st century. Is it a place for a meal, or is it a space that pronounces culture, promotes education, and keeps us from being isolated? The pandemic brought in regulations and restrictions, encroachments on our spaces, preventive practices, and bans. Buses and trains continue to be fearful and recognized sites for the spread of the virus. Household helps and domestic workers are recognized as the carriers. We have revived some old forgotten practices, restored some forgotten forms, reinvented traditions, modernized some systems, and transformed some procedures. Our resilience has taught us to maintain a continuity with the past on some occasions, to be iconoclastic when need be, and have a syncretic approach in circumstances. COVID-19 brought into our lives a paradigm shift, and the internet, social media, and varied forms of communications assisted us in adapting to these many cultural changes. The pandemic saw us at Vaze, evolving into a new avatar as Vaze Autonomous, and this near seismic change offered us an opportunity to reboot our systems. We are doing our best to absorb the fundamentals of an autonomous college, boards of study meetings, academic council, and governing body meetings on digital platforms. Expert advice has been absorbed online by us. All our extracurricular and co-curricular activities, including our Founders' Day, cultural events, intercollegiate fests, were digitally conducted. Our social media presence has not been too mean too. While ideas and opinions have governed, have continued to play an inordinate role ever since Hammurabi gave his code of laws for society in Babylon 3,800 years ago. The year 2020 has been a year when academics, think tanks, journalists, anchors, analysts, and historians have been dishing out advice and sermons through web conferences and seminars on how a political party should run its affairs, what economic policy the finance minister should adopt, and the ideal response to a public health crisis. Conferences are part of the academic DNA. Conferences help network building and also facilitate research partnerships and career advancement. Today's conference is the result exactly of this thinking. Towards planning for this conference, we had a number of pre-conference workshops for young teachers and students for understanding the basics of writing research abstracts and papers, and also to explain the requirements of a good presentation. This conference envisions a production of a database in the form of publications of the best inputs of the proceedings. Our sub-themes for the 2 days move from generic to specifics of the pandemic, and we are happy to announce that we have had an overwhelming response to this conference, with approximately 400-odd papers and posters from the academia, including teachers, independent researchers, PhD and MPhil scholars, and under and postgraduate students. We have 34 technical sessions. We have 1 keynote, 2 plenaries, and a panel discussion with 6 experts speaking about the pandemic and food, the real estate, the role of NGOs, film and media, and artificial intelligence. 2020 was the year of the virus. It was the year of the healthcare worker, the year of the scientist and the researcher, the data scientist. It was about staying positive, staying happy, and staying home. Many unknowns remain. What will 2021 be? Can vaccines leave lasting immunity? Will the virus mutate to beat it fully and thoroughly? Will there be more long-term effects that we have not yet identified? Will cinema halls witness a resurgence? Will we go back to the big fat Indian wedding? Will work from home continue? Will we engage with our travel plans? What will governments do? What will families do? Will each of us have a disaster management plan? Will there be herd immunity? We hope this conference will argue and answer these questions. Thank you very much. Let it be a great session of learning.
Thank you, Dr. I forget removing this mask. Our neighbor was blessed with a child just before the pandemic, and during the last 20 years he realized that mouth is probably a private part because it has been always covered. When Dr. Preetha was ending her concept note and she ended with a hope, positive hope, I was reminded about a story of a donkey and a horse. A poor farmer had a donkey and a horse in his stable, and he gave loads of work to both the donkey and the horse. And both of them were very troubled and they were very fed up and they wanted to run away. And one late evening, the farmer forgot to tie the donkey as well as the horse. And the horse therefore told the donkey, "Chalo, let's run away. This is the time for freedom. This we will not get an opportunity again." The donkey said to the horse, "You may proceed, but I will prefer to stay here." So the horse was puzzled as to why do you want to stay back. So the donkey said that the poor farmer has a beautiful daughter, and many a times when she doesn't listen to her father, the father always tells her and scolds her that, "Look, if you do not listen to me, I will get you married to the donkey." So I have a hope that one day the farmer will achieve his promise. Anyway, so this was in a lighter vein, and I thought I will bridge some gap of 2-3 minutes before I request Dr. Dinesh to come on the dais and request the dignitaries on the dais to release the book of abstracts. Dr. Dinesh.
Thank you, Professor Anil Naik. We could manage getting about 130 abstracts on a wide range of topics, marking the knowledge production under the wider title, The Pandemic Turn. To give a bit of information about what we have come out in the form of publication, is that we could get papers from across the world. There are papers from UAE, there are papers from the US, and most importantly, almost all the teachers of Vaze Kelkar College have contributed in the form of a paper. And this is a compilation of nearly 130 abstracts. And these abstracts really reveal in their content the pandemic turn. As the term goes, right from the 1960s, humanities and social sciences have been talking about a series of turns, starting with the gender turn, then the spatiality, space as a turn, and corporeality as another turn. And we at Vaze College, we came to an awareness that the pandemic and the current zoonosis and its the perilous world and the domain in which we are living are compelling enough to consider in the academia, that we have come to locate that all our research, education and knowledge production have taken a turn, turned a corner, and the pandemic has been, and its experiences have been so very compelling that it is almost inevitable that we work on that. I request all the dignitaries to please release this compilation of abstracts, and I assure all the participants and all the authors that an e-copy of the same will be made available, and after the inaugural, that will also be posted in the groups. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Dinesh. Now, before I request Professor 𝙏𝙗𝙬𝙀 to address, I would request Dr. Shyam to introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much, Professor Anil Naik. A very good morning to everybody. A very good morning to all the respected dignitaries on the dais. The honor and pleasure is all mine, because I get this opportunity within less than a span of 12 months to introduce a very eminent scholar, Dr. 𝙏𝙗𝙬𝙀, to introduce him in an international conference. Dr. 𝙏𝙗𝙬𝙀 joined the faculty at the University of Idaho in 2012 after teaching for 17 years at the University of Nevada, Reno, where he helped to create the prominent graduate program in literature and environment and develop the Center of Environmental Arts and Humanities, the Academy for the Environment, and the Undergraduate Environmental Studies program. He served as chair of Idaho's English department from 2014 to 2018. He has published more than 300 articles, interviews, op-eds, and reviews, and is the author, editor, or co-editor of 27 books, including Going Away to Think, Engagement, Retreat, and Eco-Critical Responsibility, 2008, and the textbook Literature and the Environment, 1999. More recent books include Eco-Criticism of the Global South, 2015, Currents of the Universal Being, Exploration in the Literature of Energy, 2015, Numbers and Nerves, Information, Emotion, and Meaning in a World of Data 2015, Eco-Criticism in Taiwan, Identity, Environment and the Arts. The list goes on. I'll rather say a few different things about him than reading out the titles of all his books. Dr. 𝙗𝙗 served as the founding president of the Association for the Study of Literature and Environment from 1992 to 1995. He edited the journal IL, Interdisciplinary Studies in Literature and Environment from 1995 to 2020. So this says about him being a prominent editor, a very scholarly editor, along with being an environmental commentator. He edited the Environmental Arts and Humanities book series, University of Nevada Press, 1996 to 2001, and the Credo series, Milkweed Editions, 1997 to 2005. Currently, he co-edits two book series for Routledge Studies in World Literatures and the Environment with Swarnalatha Rangarajan, and Routledge Environmental Humanities with Johnny Adamson and Yuki Masami. He also serves on the editorial boards for 16 scholarly journals and 2 presses, Tory House Press and Lexington Books Rowman and Littlefield Publishing Group. Previously, he has been a Fulbright National Screening Committee member for the Institute of International Education and also a panelist in American Studies and American Literature for the National Endowment of the Humanities and the American Council of Learned Societies. He has been a Fulbright Scholar in Germany, University of Bonn from 1986 to 1987, Japan, China, and has been a visiting professor at many universities around the world. He was appointed as a Fulbright specialist to visit Cappadocia University's Environmental Humanities Center in Turkey, a visit that will take place when COVID-19 travel restrictions will have subsided. In addition to his position as University Distinguished Professor of Environmental Humanities in the Department of English at Idaho, Dr. Scott 𝙗𝙗 has an affiliate appointment in the Department of Natural Resources and Society. He has also served as a faculty fellow in the Office of Research and Economic Development since 2017, responsible for special initiatives in cross-disciplinary, international, and public impact research. In this capacity, he has co-authored the Public Impact Research Report for the Association of Public and Land Grant Universities in 2019, and he continues to be a member of the Interim Leadership Council for the HIBAR, Highly Integrative Basic and Responsive Research Alliance. He helped to develop the University of Idaho's semester in the WILD program in 2013 and regularly teaches the environmental writing course in the annual fall semester program, which takes place at the Taylor Wilderness Research Center in the Frank Church River of No Return Wilderness in central Idaho. That's a very, very highly inspiring bio note of Dr. Scott 𝙗𝙗. I welcome him to this conference. Looking forward to listening to your enlightening talk, Dr. Scott 𝙗𝙗. Thank you so much.
Good morning, and thank you very much for that nice introduction. Can you hear me? Am I coming through? I hope so. Please signal me if you can't hear me. Well, thank you to the host for organizing this conference, and thanks to all of the opening speakers. I feel as if I learned quite a bit about the pandemic turn simply by listening to the opening series of talks. And I hope I can add a few ideas to the conversation and help to kick off the rest of the many talks that will take place during this meeting. Speaking to you on Wednesday evening in my part of the world, here in the Western American state of Oregon. I teach in Idaho, but I'm living in Oregon these days. It's my pleasure to participate in today's conversation about how the world order may have shifted fundamentally in the past year as a result of the COVID pandemic. Indeed, we seem to have entered a new state of mind that could be described as the pandemic turn, which is the title of today's I've given several online talks in India since this past May, and some of you may have heard one or two of the previous presentations on the meaning of the pandemic experience and how the pandemic has changed the way we think in my particular academic discipline, which is known as the environmental humanities. Today I'd like to reiterate some of the basic ideas that I continue to take away from my own experience of the pandemic and extend my earlier thoughts about the pandemic's influence on the environmental humanities, with a particular focus on the growing convergence between two interdisciplinary fields within the humanities, the medical humanities and the environmental humanities. Soon after people around the world began changing their lives in reaction to the pandemic, I began to think in particular about the psychological responses I had observed through the media and in my own life. In some of my previous talks, I've listed several examples of what I call COVID minds, by which I mean ways of thinking inspired by the COVID crisis that might actually be beneficial to our ongoing survival as a species, enabling us to adapt to this world of worries and uncertainties. So I'll list a few of these new ways of thinking, and maybe some of you have other ideas about COVID mind based on your own lives, your own culture, and your own particular experiences or frustrations or discoveries as a result of the pandemic. What I would like to emphasize is a sense of universal vulnerability in particular. Universal vulnerability. In addition, I've noted elsewhere that we seem to have a heightened awareness of the human mind's insensitivity or frailty when it comes to perceiving exponential and potentially catastrophic change. We have great difficulty capturing the meaning of exponential change. Also, there's a growing awareness that our interactions with the animal world have genuine consequences for human beings, as in the case of the zoonotic transmission of disease. And then finally, an appreciation of what it means to put on the socio-cultural brakes, to come to a halt in various aspects of our daily experience, and truly change the way we live, our interactions with other people, the way we do our work, for those of us who've been able to continue working, our experience of travel, which means for many of us there is little or no travel for at least a year, and so forth. In many ways that we could hardly have imagined slightly more than a year ago, we have absolutely put on the brakes and become familiar with completely new ways of living. Again, these four ideas are points about the psychology of the pandemic that I've been writing and lecturing about in the past year. In today's talk, I wanted to focus on the specific idea of a universal sense of vulnerability, which I've called 𝑘𝙗𝙗 in the title of my talk, using the term developed by Professor 𝘾𝙝𝙤𝙦 from Hyderabad University. And I also wanted to talk a little bit today about the potential conjunction, the coming together of the medical humanities and the environmental humanities, especially vis-a-vis the COVID pandemic. I'm interested in highlighting the strangely paradoxical psychological dimension of the pandemic, at least in my own experience, describing the paradox as one where I seem to be living my life these days in a dissonant condition of normalcy and peril. I know that there are a lot of dangerous things out there in the world. In fact, there's a kind of implicit danger these days, even in standing too close to my neighbors and possibly sharing specks of contaminated bodily fluids merely by speaking to friends and family members. To think this way is really strange, isn't it? and yet it's become a new normal, the new normal for all of us. Eco-precarity is the idea accentuated by certain kinds of cultural texts that we live in a world where human beings and other living organisms are vulnerable to various threats. As Pramod K. Nayar, whom I'll discuss further in a minute, puts it, quote, precariousness is the effect of an exposure to the world which then inflicts injury. Again, precariousness is the effect of an exposure to the world which then inflicts injury, end quote. And eco-precarity emphasizes the idea that our own vulnerability may be caused by threats from the natural environment, and the idea that the environment itself may be vulnerable to various threats, including threats caused by human beings. When the pandemic descended upon us in February 2020, at least in my part of the world, and I realize it began to strike other parts of the world earlier than that, anyway, in February 2020, we had just begun a new academic term at the University of Idaho, where I teach. I was offering 2 classes at the time, an undergraduate writing class and a graduate seminar on the environmental humanities. We began the term meeting face-to-face, sitting in rooms together, which many of us had been doing with students for decades, for our entire careers. And then all of a sudden, last March, we shifted all classes to a virtual format, most of us teaching over Zoom. And I haven't seen any students face-to-face since that time. Our fall semester, which took place from August to December last year, occurred almost entirely in an online format. And I taught a synchronous Zoom-based class for graduate students and a fully asynchronous online course for undergraduates. At the moment, I'm teaching 2 more classes over Zoom. So what I'm trying to say is that for a year now, I've practiced this new reality of keeping socially distant through technology from my students. In fact, I'm now living more than 700 kilometers away from my university, doing all of my work, from classes to faculty meetings, remotely. This is primarily a response to my perception of the risk of COVID-19 and my unwillingness to behave in ways that seem reckless and unnecessarily dangerous. There was strong pressure at American universities, especially as we began the new academic year this past August, strong pressure to try to meet the students in person, face-to-face, despite what many of us thought was the very risky chance of being exposed to COVID-19 from our students, or possibly bringing our students into contact with each other or with ourselves after we had been exposed, and unnecessarily furthering the spread of the disease. The university administration was compelling us to meet in person, and it actually took a near rebellion from the faculty members to say, wait a minute, we can actually conduct our classes very effectively in a virtual format, and we should not take any risks while the pandemic is raging, and we don't really understand how the spread is occurring, and certainly 6 or 8 months ago, we did not have any vaccines at all. So it really took a kind of counter-pressure from the faculty members to avoid simply continuing with in-person teaching as we had for so many years before. When I first wrote about the strange psychological balance of normalcy and peril that many of us are experiencing during the pandemic in April of last year, we had only a few thousand known COVID deaths in the United States, and already we were feeling there's something very risky and mysterious happening in our society. When I gave a talk about the pandemic psychology in August of 2020, the Centers for Disease Control in the U.S. had just announced that we had experienced around 181,000 deaths in the United States. And then a few days ago, in February 2021, our new president, Joe Biden, paused in his routine to somberly acknowledge that 500,000 people, that is 500,000 people, have died in the United States in the past year as a result of the pandemic. 500,000, and that is deaths, not people who've taken ill. I believe the number is more than 10,000 who've been diagnosed with the illness. And I heard this evening that I believe 156,000 people or so have died up to this point in India as a result of the pandemic. One of the strange surprises to me, given all of this danger and suffering during the pandemic, that there's a kind of normalcy in our lives, at least in my environment here in the city of Eugene, Oregon, even in the midst of the COVID crisis, despite the tremendous suffering and loss of life. And at the same time, I find myself thinking about the peril of our species in a more acute and visceral way than was previously the case, even though I know the world is fraught with risk and danger, with uncertainty. It seems to me that we should carry away from the current moment the powerful idea that so-called normalcy and so-called peril coexist paradoxically in an uneasy tension. Today's paradoxical mindset should, I think, be part of what I call the COVID mind, and what many participants in this conference are thinking of as the pandemic turn, this surprising, seemingly unnatural and impossible combination of states of mind. To me, normalcy enables us to conduct our daily lives with a certain effectiveness, but peril should keep us on our toes, vigilant and concerned. We are all vulnerable. I tried to describe this paradox of normalcy and peril in an article I wrote about COVID mind for the Swedish website called 𝘍𝙗𝙗𝙗𝑜𝑟g, which published a special group of articles last year titled The New Normal in Environmental Humanities Perspective. Basically about a dozen responses to the pandemic from the discipline of the environmental humanities. Some of the best thinking I've encountered on the subject of vulnerability is in the work of Professor 𝙤𝙗𝙗, which I mentioned earlier. Pramod Nayar has published 2 recent books on different aspects of precarity from both social justice and environmental perspectives. These include the 2017 book titled Bhopal's Ecological Gothic, Disaster, Precarity, and the Biopolitical Uncanny, and the 2019 publication titled Eco-Precarity, Vulnerable Lives in Literature and Culture. The earlier book about Bhopal argues that the terrible Union Carbide chemical accident of 1984 has continued to haunt society for more than 30 years, characterizing Bhopali lives and stimulating public concern about the dangers of industrial society and the frequently unethical practices of multinational corporations in externalizing risks and costs, the risks and costs of their activities. Nayar focuses in particular on the Gothic quality of the art and literature that have emerged from the 1984 disaster, a quality that results in a kind of unsettling psychological affect, a feeling of disquiet. This is a good thing, as I understand it, this uncanniness, this uneasiness. The way disaster texts, such as the tradition of Bhopal-related work, enables us to be concerned about an event that occurred long ago to people far away, and enables us potentially to exert our voices, our economic actions, and our votes to prevent future such occurrences. The cultural representation of vulnerable Bhopali lives helps to create enhanced public awareness of an ongoing ecological and biopolitical threat. Nayar points to such artistic works as Indra Sinha's 2007 novel, Animals, People, as the chief examples of cultural texts that gothicize the Bhopali experience, creating an uncanny sensation for readers because they represent, the reality represented there is both familiar and strange. In a sense, this uncanniness may be what I'm trying to explain when I speak about the simultaneous sense of normalcy and peril that characterizes my experience of the COVID pandemic so far. Nayar writes in Bhopal's Ecological Gothic that, quote, the Bhopal texts foreground the social ontology of the Bhopali, one that slides from vulnerability to helplessness or a state of precariousness. It is an ecosystem and ecology wherein precarity is the order of the Bhopali day. The Bhopal Gothic, in its discourse of indurability, points less to the bodies of the victim than to the embedding of these bodies in specifically dangerous settings and environs haunted by a toxic past. That is, the Bhopal Gothic of toxic haunting, specters of destruction, secrecy, and repression is cathected or invested with emotional energy onto the bodies and the body politic, both of which thereby are rendered precarious. Precarious subjects, individuals, constitute the precarious public sphere in Bhopal even 30 years after the disaster. Bhopal instantiates a precarious cultural condition in its texts from 1984 to the present. End quote. What Nayar seems to be emphasizing in this passage is the idea that the physical environment of one specific place in the world, Bhopal, India, has come to represent not only toxicity, but precarity itself. Cultural texts, such as literature, film, and photography, play a particular role in reinforcing the cultural function of Bhopal, reminding society of the specters of destruction created by certain kinds of industrial activity. There is also, of course, a social justice aspect to the Bhopal story, just as there is in the case of COVID-19. Nayar turns to theorist Judith Butler's 2008 book, Precarious Life, The Powers of Mourning and Violence, to emphasize the fact that some lives are rendered more precarious, unlivable, and their deaths less grievable than others. I realize that we are currently in the midst of the COVID pandemic. The experience has not receded into history, and yet even in the heart of this experience, as our minds adjust to the new reality, there is a danger that we might become increasingly complacent and numb to the perils of the world, including the potential for even more expansive contagion. This is especially the case when we cannot see the danger around us. The sheer invisibility of the threat leads to insensitivity, and as Nayar describes it in the case of Bhopal, a kind of repression of knowledge and awareness. In a section of Bhopal's Ecological Gothic titled Apprehension, Recognition, and the Repressed, Nayar points to the fact that a lot of information about the 1984 accident in Bhopal was, quote-unquote, secreted away in files and communications controlled by Union Carbide of India Limited and government officials. He refers to the idea of secret information and ambiguous information as a kind of textual uncanny, by which there is a societal repression of the information necessary for the public to remember and care about events like Bhopal. The alternative to repression is apprehension, or the cognitive grasping of a phenomenon or an experience. Judith Butler writes that apprehension is a form of knowing bound up with sensing and perceiving. We face a similar predicament with regard to our efforts to grasp and appreciate the meaning of the current pandemic, as much of the experience of the pandemic is hidden away in hospitals, the data secreted in government databases that are minimally available to the public. I'm not certain what the situation has been in India regarding the availability of COVID information, but in the US, the government actively suppressed information during the previous administration of Donald Trump in an appalling way that I've never seen or heard about previously, firing or otherwise silencing government officials who tried to go public with information the administration deemed detrimental to reopening the economy. Much of what Nayar claims about the secrecy related to the Bhopal accident and the efforts of subsequent journalists, artists, and writers to reveal secret information feels eerily relevant to the experience we faced in the United States with regard to the pandemic before we had a regime change approximately 1 month ago. I wanted to mention, too, the compelling conclusion Nayar offers in his book, Bhopal's Ecological Gothic, in which he discusses Raghu Rai's photograph, Burial of an Unknown Child, analyzing the visual rhetoric of the image, which shows a hand appearing to brush dirt and stones from the face of a small child whose body is otherwise covered. As we look ahead to future textual representations of the pandemic we are now living through, we might stay alert to the use of jarring visual and narrative rhetoric of this kind, in which normalcy and peril, the normalcy and peril of our present moment, might be captured. Nayar describes the dissonant, uncanny pairing of decorum and the grotesque captured in Rai's photograph as follows, quote, "There is a certain tenderness with which the hand brushes the mud and gravel around the child's face and head. The tenderness standing as a sharp contrast to the horrors of 2nd and 3rd December 1984 is gut-wrenching because it also signals a delicacy, a propriety toward the dead child, which the child was possibly never accorded in the moments of dying. There is, in the act captured in the photograph, a fantasy or illusion of decorum which Bhopal did not possess or exhibit in the course of the disaster, nor was it allowed the victims or survivors. However, in the bleached, staring eyes of the dead child, the anonymity of identity sits oddly with delicacy and propriety of the brushing hand. I suggest that what arrests us is the very conjunction of the delicate and proper with the grotesque, the image of the respected, dignified body being treated with care is an odd reminder of the sheer grotesque nature of the deaths of Bhopal, contorted physiologies, choking and coughing to death," end quote. By exploring the aesthetic, ethical, rhetorical, and psychological nuances of textual representations of vulnerability in the context of the 1984 industrial disaster in Bhopal, Pramod Nayar offers a blueprint for how we might begin to understand the current public health crisis that is not confined to a single city or region on the planet, but is shared across continents and nations. The global dimension of the COVID pandemic is strikingly different than the Bhopal story, but in some ways, even a seemingly place-focused industrial disaster is actually more widespread than it may seem at first glance, representative as it is of a broader risk posed by modern technology and global capitalism. Nayar was clearly thinking of the psychology and aesthetics of precarity in a much broader context than the Bhopal story alone when he was working on the 2017 volume, as he shortly thereafter published the 2019 book, Eco-Precarity, Vulnerable Lives in Literature and Culture, which argues that the quote-unquote precariat, those who experience precarity, include not only diverse human beings, but non-human subjects. Nayar argues that ecological disaster and eco-apocalypse, along with different states of eco-precarity, are central to contemporary environmentality, the term Lawrence Buell used in 2005 to describe the modes through which literary and cultural texts, from cinema to fiction, engage with ecological issues and concerns. The particular focus of the book Eco-Precarity is the contingent nature of the earth, what Nayar calls the beauty, fragility, and singularity of the planet we inhabit, which we stand to lose if we do not take care of our only home. In Eco-Precarity, Nayar ventures into the territory of a project I'm currently working on with my colleague Swarnalatha Rangaranjan from the Indian Institute of Technology in Madras and Vidya Sarveswaran from IIT Jodhpur. And this project is a handbook to medical environmental humanities that will include approximately 30 chapters by scholars from throughout the world, attempting to understand various connections between human health and the external world, and also exploring the health and vulnerability of the non-human realm from the perspective of illness, injury, and well-being. Just as Pramod Nayar was able easily to adapt his analysis of human precarity to the broader planetary context in moving from Bhopal's ecological Gothic to the more recent book, Eco-Precarity, there have long been efforts to use the rubric of health and medicine to characterize human interactions with nature. When Swarnalatha, Vidya, and I approached potential contributors to the Medical Environmental Humanities Handbook, we invited them to try to explore human and planetary health in ways that go beyond the loose symbolic idea of health in human and non-human contexts, using theories of disease, disrepair, treatment, recovery, and physical and mental well-being from various cultures around the world. Contributors are discussing the use of narrative medicine as a way of revealing the plight of victims of contaminated environments, the linkages between mental illness and geographical displacement, the effort to bring medical advancements into the Amazon rainforest to support the health of indigenous tribespeople, rather than removing sick people and treating them in Brazilian cities and disrupting their experience of place and community, along with many other medical and environmental topics. The cultural lenses on the conjunction between human health and the natural world range from traditional Sufi folk music from Turkey to Ayurvedic philosophy from India. One article explores the idea of human-plant intercorporeality, the merging of human and plant bodies in Australian Aboriginal poetry, while another considers the role of nature in traditional medicine as represented in the novels of Nigerian author Chinua Achebe. The central goal of the book project is to show how our ecological predicament, toxic water, land, water, and air, loss of species, diminished access to water and other resources needed for survival, and a changing climate that will fundamentally disrupt human life and many other life forms on the planet, is a simultaneous threat to human health. The special challenge in this project, the Handbook to Medical Environmental Humanities, is to go beyond superficial analogies between human health and planetary health, which abound in popular culture. We have received about 20 chapter manuscripts for the book so far, and the contributors seem to be doing a good job of addressing the psychological and physical connections between environmental conditions and human health. A few such examples include one from Professor Jaru Chang from Brooklyn College in New York, titled "We Are All in This Together, COVID Pathology, Scapegoat, and Hope," which seeks to understand COVID pathology from a range of perspectives, not only the biophysical one. Professor Chang writes, "Here we can see COVID pathology encompasses a wide range of pathological conditions, from biological infection from the virus and mental trauma to abnormal social behavior, triggered by the pandemic. This chapter zooms in on the prevalent racist and xenophobic attacks during the COVID pandemic and frames them as an example of socio-ideological COVID pathology. As a self-defense and coping strategy, an individual or community tends to find something or somebody to blame, such as a divine cosmic plot, or more mundanely, a political conspiracy theory. One of the most dangerous ideological pathologies is blaming and prompting hate crimes and violence against cultural and non-human others for the outbreak and mishandling of the disease, end quote. As a Taiwanese scholar of Chinese culture living in the United States, Professor Chang is particularly sensitive to the anti-Chinese response in this country as a way of scapegoating people associated with the country where COVID-19 originated. She refers to this as a form of ecofascism, which is an aberrant and dangerous social pathology. Chang is also a specialist in critical animal studies, very sensitive to the relationships between humans and other species. So an important part of her study is also the section called Blaming the Animal Other, where she focuses on the zoonotic aspects of COVID, the fact that the disease is likely to have been transferred to humans from other animal species. She writes, just as there is a reactionary game of blaming and stigmatizing infected or potentially infectious human bodies, so animals are not exempt from scapegoating. That is, whenever a zoonotic outbreak occurs, non-human animals are blamed as the cause, even before they're proven guilty, end quote. Professor Chang uses René Girard's scapegoat theory to explain the social process by which individuals or groups within society are singled out for undeserved blame and treatment, representing this as a common but dangerous psychological pathology, one that many countries are experiencing at this very moment as a result of the pandemic. The environmental connections are, in this case, result from the fact that the virus may well have originated in another animal species, although to my knowledge this has not yet been verified, and in the fact that certain kinds of animals, such as bats and pangolins, were quickly identified as the possible villains in allowing the disease to make the leap to human beings. Professor Chang concludes her article with an extended analysis, and this is where she focuses on her idea of post-COVID hope, of what she calls a collective, multicultural, multi-species, post-humanist community, using post-humanist theory from Rosi Braidotti and others to suggest that we might use the pandemic as an opportunity to learn how to coexist with the virus. She points as an example of this to the 2012 novel by Chinese writer and physician 𝙏𝙗𝙗𝙗, a book titled Coronavirus, again from 2012, well before the current pandemic, in which B calls for respect for species' place in the web of life and invokes a sense of humility and awe vis-a-vis the virus, end quote. So in the case of this particular study, the medical aspects involve not only the study of our responses to the current public health crisis, but a consideration of the broader pathology of blaming or scapegoating. The environmental aspect of Professor Chang's study centers on our attitudes toward other living beings, including possible carriers of the COVID virus. There are a few other chapters in the handbook that also seem directly relevant to the COVID pandemic, such as Turkish scholar Gizem Yilmaz Karahan's essay titled Contagious History, The Imagination of Viruses, and French scholar Françoise Besson's Disseminating the Seeds of Words to Fighting Spreading Diseases, from Albert Camus' La Peste to Tony Hillerman's The First Eagle. And then recently we received a manuscript from another Taiwanese scholar, Catherine Yalan Chang, titled Reframing Care in the Age of Novel Coronavirus, Food as Medicine on the Farms of Two Physician Farmers, in which the author suggests that we can link seemingly unrelated contemporary health crises, such as the COVID-19 and diabetes, by contemplating our increasingly broken and unhealthy global food system. What I've tried to suggest in my talk is that in various ways, the COVID pandemic and various other crises we're experiencing have led to a broad sense of vulnerability or precarity that all of us are experiencing nowadays to some degree, although certainly some people are much more vulnerable than others. I've tried also to probe a little bit into the strange and even paradoxical combination of normalcy and peril that we're experiencing as we accustom ourselves to the new normal of the risky pandemic world. And I've attempted to sketch out, at least briefly, the possibility of bringing together an interest in human, physical, and mental health and our environmental concerns. This latter approach seems to be a valuable new approach in contemporary interdisciplinary humanities research, and may be one of the ways the humanities can contribute something meaningful during a time of planetary crisis. Now, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Scott. Indeed, in fact, it was a very exhaustive and detailed analysis. I now request Dr. Neeta Medha to introduce our next plenary speaker, Professor 𝘂𝙗𝙗𝙗.
For plenary session, Dr. 𝘂𝙗𝙗𝙗 is a clinical professor of management at �11 College of Arts, a faculty member for corporate and executive education, and member of the Institute for Energy and Environment. His interests are in the areas of technology management, innovation, and strategy. He received his undergraduate degree from which is now called ICT, Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai. His PhD is from Vanderbilt University, private research university in Nashville, Tennessee. He has over 25 years of experience providing consulting advisory services to national and international companies. Today, Professor 𝘂𝙗𝙗 is going to talk about lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic to address another global problem. Professor 𝘂𝙗𝙗 says that we have all unfortunately witnessed and desperately tried restrictions of movement and upending of economic activity as individuals, companies, and government try to adjust to the assumptions of how the world operates. In this paper, he examines how our experience with the pandemic can be used to tackle the looming global problem of climate change.
I invite Professor 𝘂𝙗𝙗 to begin his plenary session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Medha, for the kind introduction. So I'd like to start off by thanking Vaze College, the trustees, the administrators, the faculty, and indeed the organizers of this conference for holding this wonderful event. I'd like to give a special shout out to Dr. Preeta Nilesh, the Vice Principal and the Dean of the College of Humanities and Social Sciences at Vaze College, for her unbridled energy and enthusiasm in organizing this event, and for relentlessly pursuing the presenters for submitting
the material to her, their conference material to her on time. So well done. So as Dr. Mehta mentioned, my topic is on this global issue of the pandemic as relates to this global problem of climate change. So if you allow me to share my screen with you all. I'm going to talk about the lessons from the global pandemic to address another growing global problem, that of climate change. So the questions that I'd like to consider in the talk today is what lessons can be learned from the current pandemic that relates to climate change? What implications, positive or negative, could responses that we have done with the pandemic hold for climate action? And thirdly, what steps could governments, companies, and individuals take so as to align lessons or responses to the pandemic with the imperatives of climate change and sustainability? So what are the similarities between the COVID pandemic and climate change? The first thing is that COVID was a systemic type event. What that means is that it started off as a health issue, and soon it transmitted itself into other areas of the economy and indeed into other areas of the world. An example of this is that as soon as we had countries dealing with COVID, they immediately shut down. And as they shut down, what happened was transportation ceased. We all started working from home, industrial activity ceased. And as a result, there was no demand in transportation fuels. So things like oil, etc., was not as much demanded by people. And so there were changes in the price of oil. As a result of this, OPEC, which controls the oil market, met, and they had to make a decision on what to do with production and indeed the supply of oil to the world. And in a strange twist of events, rather than lowering the production, what they ended up doing was two countries, Saudi Arabia and Russia, got into a one-upmanship game, and they actually increased production. As a result of increase of production, there was a total collapse in oil prices, and that collapse led to negative oil prices, people willing to pay people to take oil off their hands, something that had never happened in history. That in turn affected commodity prices of other material, and which then affected the stock market, and it affected all our wallets. So COVID turned out to be a systemic event affecting a wide range of things. Climate change is going to be a similar type of situation where change in weather, change in temperatures, change in systems affect a whole lot of things that we probably cannot even envision in terms of the enormity. The second is that COVID is a non-linear event. So what I mean by that is, as soon as COVID happened in places around the world, immediately cities and countries tried to make a calculation. How many people getting sick on a daily basis? How many people going to the hospital on a daily basis? And then extrapolating that to a weekly basis. So as to figure out on a weekly basis, how many doctors do we need? How many nurses do we need? How much oxygen do we need? How many hospital beds or ICUs do we need? And we were wrong in pretty much every calculation because our extrapolation of the daily to weekly was linear, while COVID turned out to be a non-linear or an exponential event that soon overwhelmed hospital capacity. There's a fear that climate change is going to be such an exponential type event, not a linear event, meaning that if temperatures get beyond 3, 4, 5 degrees, we are not able to predict what will happen. Are glaciers going to melt at a much, much faster rate? Is the ocean going to get more and more acidic? Is ecosystem damage going to be irreversible? So these are things that are hallmarks of non-linear events. COVID was also a regressive event. What that means is that it has disproportionately affected the most vulnerable section of our population. As the introductory speakers talked about today, migrant labor was really affected in India when there was a total shutdown. People did not have the means or ability to get to their towns and villages once you had stopped to the trains or buses that didn't allow them to get to where they wanted to go, and they were stuck. Climate change is going to be such a regressive event. It's going to affect the poor people a lot more than the rich people, and it's going to affect poorer countries a lot more than richer countries. These events, whether it's COVID or climate change, are not black swan events. A black swan event is a rare, unpredictable event. As we know, pandemics have happened before. As was mentioned previously, in the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic that's been given a lot of attention was a big pandemic that happened right in the middle of World War I and killed 50 million people. But there have been pandemics going back in Indian history and indeed world history. The Greek and the Spartans had pandemics of their own. In fact, I think 22 years before the Spanish flu happened, there was a pandemic right there in Mumbai, which was a bubonic plague that killed millions. There have since been pandemics after 1918 as well, known as SARS or MERS or avian flu or swine flu or Ebola. These are all pandemics. As Dr. 𝙿𝙗𝙗 mentioned in his talk, there have been books written about pandemics. So COVID unfortunately came to us, but it was not rare, and it was predicted not only from history, but in books and movies, and in fact discussed in the World Economic Forum meetings over the last 5 years in Davos as one of the things that was very likely to happen as we progressed with industrialization at the level at which we are going through. Climate change similarly is not a black swan event. People started talking about climate change more than 100 years ago, and they predicted that as human activity continued to move at the rate at which it was moving, there's going to be an enormous amount of greenhouse gases that's going to be in the atmosphere that are going to raise global temperatures. And unfortunately, all their predictions about global warming and climate change has come true. There have been more droughts, more famines, and more disasters in terms of melting of glaciers and other things. In fact, if you look at the last decade, 2011 to 2020, this was the most or the hottest decade on record. And in the last 5 years, the years 2016 and 2020 have been the hottest years on record. So unfortunately, all the predictions that were made about climate change is coming true. Finally, both COVID and climate change require global coordination and cooperation. As the old saying goes, none of us is safe until all of us are safe. So what are the differences between COVID and climate change? For one, the timescales of occurrence and resolution is completely different. We can measure occurrence and resolution of COVID as months or weeks or months or years in terms of resolving the problem. Climate change, unfortunately, is either years, decades, and hopefully, we've been talking about that for centuries now. The perceptions and risks of COVID and climate change are also different. The perceptions and risks with COVID are pretty immediate. We know people getting sick. We know what they have to do, quarantine for 10 to 14 days, or you go to the hospital and hopefully you get better. And so the perceptions and risks that we have are more immediate versus climate change, which is more gradual and cumulative. So is Mumbai getting hot in the middle of January, in the middle of the day in January, a sign of climate change? Are the monsoons getting more and more stronger every year a sign of climate change? These are questions that come to pass only on a gradual or cumulative basis. The cost of inaction of COVID, unfortunately, as we've all witnessed, is human death and loss of economic activity. The cost of inaction of climate change is going to be far worse. If nothing is done, we could be looking at catastrophic events like loss of human civilization and loss of Mother Earth. So cost of inaction, when you look at the more drastic case, is not a very palatable kind of situation. The extent of irreversibility of COVID and climate change are also different. When you look at COVID, maybe there are things we can put in place to sort of minimize further pandemics from happening. With climate change, there is no way to absolutely reverse what we've done. And so very difficult to put the genie back into the box once you've released it. So the extent is a little different between the two events. And then one can argue that there's been meaningful and publicized global effort to talk about climate change. This commission, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, meets on an annual basis, and since 1990 has been putting out reports in the general newspapers and alerting the public as to the dangers of climate change. With COVID, the World Health Organization meets on an annual or quarterly basis, but we've never heard in a big way about these reports being publicized. Perhaps going forth, we'll pay more attention to what some of these organizations talk about. So those are the similarities and differences between COVID and climate change. Looking at the relationships between COVID and climate change. Climate change, as we know, can contribute to pandemics. As we know, climate change is caused by greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, and the more that you have, the more that they trap heat. And so with the greenhouse gases, there's a rise in temperature. And the rise in temperature can create favorable conditions for spread of diseases. As we know, malaria and dengue in India is growing on an annual basis. Further, as we industrialize more and more, we are encroaching on the locales or the locations of wild animals. And so these disappearing habitats, because we are encroaching into their territory, may cause them to come closer to us and closer to our domesticated animals and increase the chance of spillover of pathogens between them and into us that can cause more pandemics. We also know that the actions taken to counter the pandemic that we did in most cities and countries of the world, which are lockdowns, led to vanishing pollution and reduction of carbon emissions. But this has come at an enormous human and economic cost. The other thing is mitigating environmental risks are likely to help mitigate the risks of pandemics. So reducing the demands we place on nature by optimizing our consumption, making our supply chains more local, and then substituting animal protein with plant proteins are things that will mitigate pandemic risks. So what are the lessons we can take from COVID that could accelerate climate action? As was said a couple of times during our sessions here, one of the things that we've gotten really adept at is working from home. And hopefully, as we learn to work from home, teleworking and reliance on digital channels can reduce transportation demands, transportation emissions, etc., that could help climate action. Also, reconsideration of supply chains. So localizing or repatriating supply chains can help reduce emissions as things become more and more local. Our experience with this pandemic and experience with these systemic dislocations that have happened, however unfortunate that they were, may help us better price risks now. And so since climate change is also a physical and systemic dislocation, we can hopefully better price the risks of not doing anything regarding climate change. As we all know, we had the COVID pandemic, and science and engineering helped us through this trouble. We've come up with vaccines based on mRNA platforms that are absolutely new. And so hopefully, as we learn our lessons, maybe there's more of public appreciation for scientific and technological expertise, and the role of technology in crafting solutions, perhaps for climate change, become a little more pronounced. And then we've all seen what the risks of inactions are for COVID. As we said, loss of life, complete shutdown of economic activity, which is a big no-no. It's really catastrophic. And so given that now we've been exposed to catastrophic risks, we can have a greater appetite for preventing these risks. So hopefully greater cooperation between governments, companies, and individuals within a country, maybe greater role of governments that they talk to each other and build and ensure resiliency. So are there any COVID lessons that could hamper climate actions? For sure. As we all know, we are still not traveling in a big way. We are still, industrial activity is still not where it needs to be. It's getting there, but it's still not. And as a result, we are not demanding as much fossil fuels like oil and natural gas, etc. And this has led to price drops. I think in India, petrol and diesel prices are still high because of something called the excise tax. But in a general note, fossil fuel prices all over have fallen down, have fallen in a big way. And when fossil fuel prices are so cheap, it makes transitioning to alternative sources like wind or solar very, very difficult. So cheap fossil fuel prices may delay energy transitions as we talk about climate action. We are already dealing with this pandemic, and so if we are to recover from this, we have to put plans in action in terms of spending money. And so governments and citizens are already struggling with how to respond to this health crisis, and now we've got to deal with this climate crisis as well. So we may struggle with integrating climate priorities with our health priorities as we think of economic recovery. And if we don't do it the right way, then investments are going to be affected, regulatory approaches are going to be affected, and commitments that we have that we need to do on a monthly or yearly basis towards climate action is going to be affected. And then investors, whether they are venture capitalists, whether they are government funding, whether there's money coming in from private equity companies, etc., they may delay capital allocations because they are trying to put money into other things. So there could be some sort of a delay in capital allocations that could hamper climate action. So how should we think about things for a better future? What should the role of government be? What should the role of companies be? And what should the role of individuals be? So when you look at the role of government, clearly government should look at modeling climate risks and benefits a little better and do this periodically. And so modeling climate change risks and assessing the economics, cost-benefit analysis of climate change is going to be really, really important. This can help inform recovery programs, it can help infrastructure planning and such. And then as we come out of this health pandemic, we need to make sure that we devote resources for economic recovery towards climate action as well, for climate change resiliency as well as mitigation. Thinking more in terms of renewable energy, the infrastructure around that, improving the resiliency of the power grid, looking at changing heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems in buildings, and then really new technologies to decarbonize heavy industries like steel, cement, etc. The third point is a lot of existing subsidies that exist for fossil fuel industries must be reconsidered if we are going to transition to renewable sources and go towards addressing climate change or accelerating actions towards climate change. And then if it is a global problem, the solution will have to be global. So alignment and collaboration both within and between countries to solve this global challenge is going to be very, very important. How should companies think about it? Companies have to initiate the process of decarbonizing, removing carbon emission sources from their asset base, prioritizing the retirement of economically marginal carbon-intensive assets is going to be the priority for companies. They have to think more about energy efficiency, how to do more with less energy, looking at renewable power sources, etc. And then we have to build resilience to ensure sustainability. So doing scenario analysis is extremely important. It's probably just a matter of time before we have climate crisis in one way, shape, or form. So companies will have to look at their supply chains and say, what are we going to do if we run out of water or we don't have the energy that we need? What is our plan A and plan B? We may have to do multiple hazard analysis. What happens if climate change happens along with a pandemic? How should we respond to that? What is plan D and E in that case? We have to have shorter supply chains and maybe build redundancy in the supply chain. Become more efficient in everything that we do, manufacturing, processing, etc. Also use things like digitization, big data and analytics, not just in manufacturing and processing, but in purchasing and in marketing and everything that a company really does. And then, of course, reconsiderations of travel. Do we really all need to travel for meetings, for meeting with clients, for internal meetings, etc.? Or can we use things like Zoom, like we are currently doing for this wonderful conference? And then how should we think about role of individuals? The first thing is we all need to be aware and raise awareness of the impact of this climate crisis. As we saw, the shock with the climate crisis, like with COVID, is a physical systemic type of crisis. All the crises that we've been used to up to this point have been more of financial crisis, where human sentiment is what drives the crisis. So run on the bank or crash in the stock market or currency devaluation of a country. All of these financial crises emanate from within the financial system, and it can be solved by restoring confidence in the financial system. Physical crises, as we said, are more systemic in nature, and the underlying causes of supply and demand needs to be examined. And so we need to figure out, that the shock is physical, systemic, it's non-linear, it's regressive, and ultimately it's going to be very, very costly. So we have to raise awareness of the impact of the climate crisis. And then we all saw from the pandemic that we as human beings are capable of mindset and behavioral changes. We can wear masks, we can socially distance, we can work from home. And so shifting to more sustainable sources and reducing the demands we place on the environment, etc., are things that we need to do as individuals. So I thought in the next few slides, we can take a look at how has the pandemic really affected emissions of greenhouse gases or emissions of pollutants, and what does this mean going forward? So if you look at this slide here, on the x-axis, we have the years in question, and then on the y-axis, we have annual emissions of greenhouse gases. And this is what worries most people, the steepness of this curve. So over the years, emissions of greenhouse gases has only gone up. we've had a few blips where it has marginally gone down. For example, in World War II, or when we had the oil crisis, or when USSR fell, or the financial crisis 10, 12 years ago. There were dips, but for the most part, we've continued on this increasing trajectory. There's been some sort of leveling off in this period from perhaps 2006 to 2009. And then when the pandemic hit, there was a steep drop. So this suggestion of 5 to 10% decrease in emissions with the COVID-19 crisis was postulated in somewhere around the April-May timeframe when the pandemic was still ongoing. And in the next few slides, we'll see where we ended up. But if we continue on the trajectory that we've done historically, then we are going to reach about 70 or 80 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, which points out to a temperature rise of about 5+ degrees centigrade. And what that means is sea level rise to an unanticipated degree, oceans getting more acidic, and really ecosystem tragedy that could occur that people are worried about. This shows if we are able to level off emissions where we would be. And most scientists and experts feel that we are still in very dangerous territory if we continue on this path, which is part of something called the Paris Pledge in 2015. Since 2015, we've come to the conclusion, the first conclusion we came to was we need to be on a 2-degree path. And now the more recent thinking is we need to be on a 1.5-degree path. What this means is we've got to totally change what has happened historically, and we need to go down in terms of reducing carbon emissions by 5% every year for the next 10 years, and then increase it even more drastically so that we are all carbon neutral or net zero carbon emissions by 2050. And this is a very difficult thing to do, given that we still have to increase economic output. So how did we do during this pandemic? So this chart shows the weeks when the pandemic first started and goes up to, we're getting close to a year now. And so comparing 2019 carbon emissions with 2020 carbon emissions. As you can see, as soon as China reported the emissions, there was a slight drop in carbon emissions. And then Italy reported emissions, reported the pandemic, and there were drop in emissions. And then California reported that COVID cases were there. And in the US, stopped activity. And so there was a decrease in emissions. And then number 4 is when India announced that we are going to have a nationwide lockdown, there was a decrease in emissions compared to 2019. But over a period of time, as the world has sort of recovered, we've gone back in the emissions. And so you can see that the emissions in 2020 are creeping up to the 2019 emissions of carbon dioxide. And so overall, the forecast was between a 5 to 10% drop from 2019 in carbon dioxide emissions. Unfortunately, we were closer to the 5%, about 6.5% reduction from 2019, with the US having the greatest drop of 13%, followed by India. So how are companies looking at addressing this climate change problem? A lot of companies have made significant progress in the period leading up to the pandemic. So if you look at 2014 to 2019, there's been a lot of changeover from fossil fuels to renewable capacity, growth of 50%. We've substituted meat with plant proteins. That's grown more than 85%. As we all know, companies like Tesla, NIO, and then companies in India like Honda, Hero Honda, etc., have electric cars that are now coming in to play. And so transportation needs more than 900%, and even green investing, sustainable bonds, green financing, etc., that's grown a whole lot too. How are companies thinking about the fact that we've gone through a pandemic, should we really take climate action? So here are a few slides on a survey, and this is from the food industry. So the management consulting company Bain looked at global food supply chain executives in August of 2020, about 146 of them. And the question that was asked to them was, does recent COVID events affect the importance of sustainability for your company? And they can see almost 50% said it has increased or slightly increased. So half of all companies say that COVID has increased the importance of sustainability to their company. And the importance is being felt in various ways. They're using it for decision making, strategic talks, improving processes, improving initiatives, and starting new initiatives based on innovation, etc. And so overall, when they were asked, do you think that sustainability and addressing climate change will be important? 76% of executives in the food industry said that sustainability and addressing climate action will continue to remain important. So the question is, why are companies doing it? Obviously, there might be a good part in them that says this is the right thing to do, but more and more, they're coming to the conclusion that looking at climate action and doing the right thing and becoming energy efficient, etc., increases the top line as well as the bottom line. More sales, more revenue, as well as more profit, because in the end, customers are demanding it. And so this is a real interesting slide that talks about concerns for two customer segments, millennials and Gen Zs. Millennials are those people born between 1980 to 1995, and Gen Zs are those born between 1996 to 2012. So these two subgroups of customers were asked the question before the pandemic and during the pandemic, and this is a global survey by Deloitte. They were asked to rate what are the three big issues that concern you. And both these customer segments said the environment or climate change is a big concern for us, our health is a big concern, and being employed is a big concern. And if you look, before the pandemic, climate change seemed to be overwhelmingly a big concern for both these customer groups. Obviously, as you can imagine, when this survey was taken again during the pandemic, the health issue shot up for both the groups, as did the concerns with employment, with companies being shut down, people worried about things. But for both these groups, climate change and protecting the environment remains a big, big issue. And so customers in companies are listening to the customers and trying to make sure that they pay attention to what's happening and what they're demanding and what they're asking for. And so they're creating more sustainable products and services to serve these customers. And you can see more and more companies putting a lot of money into it. For example, a few weeks ago, Microsoft, Unilever, and Amazon, each of them said, $1 billion each to looking at climate action or starting sustainability and climate change related initiatives. Further, it seems that there is lots of economic opportunity. I'm not going to go through this whole slide, but this shows the economic opportunity in South Asia and in Southeast Asia for doing sustainability related things or climate action related things. So looking at sustainable energy and resources, the opportunity is $270 billion across these areas. Food systems is a $200 billion opportunity. Being more efficient and having logistics is a 200 billion opportunity, excuse me. Having green and connected cities is a big opportunity, and so is green financing. So there are economic opportunities over $1 trillion to $2 trillion just in South Asia and in Southeast Asia. So overall, there is a very specific role for corporations, governments, investors, and individuals in addressing this climate action problem. And this is a slide put together by the institutes Greatham, IEA, IRENA, IPCC. This was put together in 2020, and it says 20 things that can be done in 2020 by corporations, by governments, by investors, and by individuals. Again, I won't read through the slide, but you can see that they're very specific kind of things that can be done. I would like to take this opportunity to put in one more bullet onto this list, number 21. We are in the year 2021, so it makes sense to have a round number in terms of initiatives. And also, I'd like to put this additional thing on the list, keeping in mind the audience that we have today. As I understand, there are a lot of people who are students at Vaze College, intelligent, bright, and energetic. And so what I would add to this list is to urge all of you to consider a career in the area of solving the climate change challenge, to use your ideas and imagination in solving this very serious problem. Obviously, while there's a great opportunity to make a difference in the communities that we live in by solving this problem, I just want to point out that there's also money to be made. One of the entities that's really good at forecasting the fields of the future are venture capitalists. And so when you look at venture capital investment in the area of climate technology, this is the next big frontier. This shows climate tech investments by venture capitalists from 2013 to 2019 in terms of investments made, as well as the number of deals across various areas of climate technology, from climate and earth data generation to storage, to buildings, to industrial processes, to food and agriculture, to mobility and transport and energy. So when you look at 2013, venture capitalists invested about $400 million. And that has skyrocketed to almost $16 billion in 2019. And so the number of deals as well has gone from about 100 to almost about 600. So this skyrocketing investment by venture capitalists mirrors the big investments of the fields of tomorrow, fields like robotics and artificial intelligence, etc., that people are talking about as the fields of tomorrow. So climate technology is clearly one of the big fields for tomorrow as venture capitalists and private equity people think about this. So once again, I would urge all the young people to consider this field seriously. And not only can you do good, but you can also do well by doing good. So profit with a purpose. With that, I'd like to end my presentation. I thank you all for your attention, and thank you all for this opportunity as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Chandran, for such a detailed analysis. Now, before I request Madam Vaishali to propose a vote of thanks, a few announcements. There are, for the participants, an important announcement for you. The links for the plenaries, technical sessions, panel discussions, and valedictory sessions have been updated on our YouTube channel, community page, and the Telegram groups. So please refer to them to access to your technical session. And all those in the auditorium proceed to the conference room after the vote of thanks for refresh.
Thank you, sir. Respected dignitaries, who have helped us in making this inaugural session a resounding success. First of all, I would like to propose hearty vote of thanks to our founder trustee, Mr. Ramesh. 𝙁𝙗𝙬 for excellently briefing us on challenges and opportunities making this inaugural session interesting and meaningful. I would like to express a profound gratitude to the founder principal, Dr. Kurup sir, for his encouraging words for making online teaching and learning more effective. I would also like to thank Sharma for his moral support and guidance. I would like to thank 𝐿𝙞𝙧𝙧𝙣 sir for gracing the occasion.
I would like to thank distinguished speaker Professor 𝘂𝙏𝙤𝙧𝙦 for a remarkable keynote address on eco-precarity and pandemic. I would like to thank plenary speaker Professor 𝘂𝙗𝙗𝙗 for enlightening us on the subject climatic change and a roadmap to deal with it. I thank the staff members who worked very hard to take care of every minute detail for making this inaugural function a great success. Thank you Neha, Pranali, Manoj. Thank you Sandeep and Shyam for auditorium arrangements. We are also grateful to all the sponsors, Indian Oil, Bank of Maharashtra, the Inaugural Club of Mulund and 𝘾𝙝𝙗𝙗 family, Mr. A.S. 𝘾𝙝𝙗𝙗, Nirmala 𝘾𝙝𝙗𝙗 and Ashwin 𝘾𝙝𝙗𝙗. Your generous contributions has been of great help in taking this conference ahead. I also thank CA Anil Naik for coordinating with sponsors. I would like to thank all the student volunteers who have been running around doing a lot of things. Thank you so much. Finally, the wonderful audience who have turned up in such great numbers online from various departments of different colleges. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Once again, I thank all for your cordial cooperation. Thank you.